Have you ever noticed that the people who hurt you the most are rarely your enemies? They are often the people you trusted, the people you loved, the people you kept giving chances to. And while you were trying to keep the peace, they were quietly stealing your confidence, your energy, and your future. The biggest mistake most people make when dealing with toxic individuals is believing that the battle is about changing the other person. They spend endless hours explaining themselves, defending their intentions, proving their innocence, or hoping that one more conversation will finally make the toxic person understand. But this is the illusion that keeps millions trapped. Toxic people are rarely interested in understanding you. They are interested in controlling the emotional climate around them. They measure success not by truth, but by your reaction. The moment you understand this, your entire perspective changes. Every toxic person has one invisible source of power: your emotional dependence on their approval, their validation, or their opinion. The more emotionally invested you become in convincing them that you are right, the more control you quietly hand over to them. It becomes a game where they decide when you feel peaceful, when you feel anxious, and when you feel worthy. Without realizing it, you begin living according to someone else's emotional weather. Think about every argument you've ever had with someone who constantly manipulates people. Did facts really matter? Did evidence change their behavior? Did your honesty suddenly inspire them to become compassionate? Most likely it didn't, because manipulation is rarely based on logic. It is based on emotion. A toxic individual understands something many people never realize. Human beings are easier to control emotionally than intellectually. If they can make you angry, they can make you impulsive. If they can make you guilty, they can make you obedient. If they can make you afraid of losing them, they can make you tolerate disrespect you would never accept from anyone else. This is why emotional control is not simply a personal virtue. It is a shield. Imagine standing in front of someone who is desperately trying to provoke you. They criticize you, they insult your decisions, they question your intelligence, they twist your words, they invent stories, they try to make you defend yourself. Most people immediately react. They explain, they argue, they interrupt, they raise their voice. They become emotionally invested in proving that they are not the person being described. And in that exact moment, the toxic person has already won, not because they proved anything, but because they successfully controlled your emotional state. Real power begins the moment you refuse to participate in that game. There is something deeply unsettling about a person who cannot be emotionally manipulated, someone who listens without panic, someone who remains calm while others become louder, someone who refuses to chase every accusation or answer every insult. That kind of composure forces manipulative people into unfamiliar territory because their usual strategies stop working. Silence often unsettles toxic people more than arguments ever could. They expect resistance. They expect emotional explosions. They expect you to lose control. When you remain composed, they lose the script they have rehearsed hundreds of times. This does not mean becoming cold or emotionless. It means choosing your emotions instead of allowing someone else to choose them for you. Many people confuse emotional control with emotional suppression. They are not the same. Suppressing emotions means pretending they don't exist. Mastering emotions means recognizing exactly what you feel without allowing those feelings to dictate your actions. You may feel disappointed, you may feel betrayed, you may feel deeply hurt, but pain does not have to become panic. Anger does not have to become revenge. Frustration does not have to become self-destruction. One of the greatest strengths a person can develop is the ability to pause before reacting. That pause changes everything. Within a few seconds of silence, you give your rational mind the opportunity to regain control over your emotional impulses. Instead of asking yourself, "How do I prove them wrong?" you begin asking a far more powerful question: what outcome actually serves me? That question separates emotionally mature people from emotionally controlled people. Not every insult deserves a response. Not every accusation deserves an explanation. Not every misunderstanding deserves your energy. Sometimes the strongest statement you can make is refusing to compete for the approval of someone who profits from your insecurity. Remember this carefully. Toxic people often study your weaknesses better than your strengths. They notice what makes you defensive. They remember what makes you feel guilty. They discover which topics make you emotional. Then they return to those exact pressure points again and again because they know they work. Once you become aware of this pattern, you stop reacting automatically. Instead of seeing every criticism as a personal attack, you begin recognizing it as a predictable strategy. Instead of feeling forced to defend yourself, you recognize that defending yourself is exactly what keeps the cycle alive. Emotional discipline is not about winning arguments. It is about refusing to let someone else decide your emotional state. The strongest people are rarely those who dominate every conversation. They are the ones who remain impossible to manipulate because their peace no longer depends on someone else's behavior. When your confidence comes from your own values instead of another person's opinion, insults lose their weight. When your identity is built on your own principles instead of external validation, manipulation loses its leverage. When your happiness depends on your purpose instead of another person's approval, toxic individuals slowly realize they no longer have access to the emotional buttons they once pressed so easily. And that is the moment the balance of power begins to shift, because the greatest victory over toxic people is never forcing them to change. It is becoming someone they can no longer control. One of the greatest advantages toxic people have is that they rarely reveal themselves at the beginning. If manipulation looked like manipulation on the first day, very few people would fall into its trap. Instead, it disguises itself as charm, concern, generosity, or even love. The smartest manipulators understand that trust is not taken by force, it is earned slowly, then exploited quietly. That is why the ability to recognize toxic patterns early is one of the most valuable skills you can ever develop. Most people don't enter toxic relationships because they are weak. They enter them because they are optimistic. They assume that everyone communicates honestly because they themselves value honesty. They believe that kindness will be returned with kindness. They expect loyalty because they are loyal. But the painful truth is that not everyone plays by the same rules. Some people see empathy not as a virtue to respect, but as a weakness to exploit. Toxic behavior rarely begins with obvious abuse. It begins with subtle tests. These individuals watch how much disrespect you will tolerate. They notice how quickly you apologize, even when you have done nothing wrong. They observe whether guilt can influence your decisions. Every interaction becomes a silent experiment. If you continue accepting behavior that violates your boundaries, they slowly increase the pressure. This is why awareness matters more than intelligence. You can be highly educated and still become trapped in manipulation if you fail to recognize emotional patterns. Toxic people do not rely on superior logic. They rely on repetition. They create cycles that confuse you until you begin questioning your own judgment. One of the most dangerous patterns is gaslighting. Gaslighting is not simply lying. It is convincing someone that their own perception cannot be trusted. Imagine confronting someone about something they clearly said or did. Instead of taking responsibility, they immediately deny it. They tell you that you misunderstood. They insist you are imagining things. They accuse you of being overly sensitive or dramatic. After hearing these responses enough times, many people stop trusting their own memory. They begin wondering whether they are actually the problem. That is exactly what the manipulator wants. A person who doubts themselves becomes much easier to control than a person who trusts their instincts. Another common pattern is guilt tripping. Toxic people understand that compassionate individuals dislike disappointing others. They use this against them. Rather than asking respectfully, they make you feel responsible for their emotions. They say things like, "After everything I've done for you," or "If you really cared about me, you would." Notice how the conversation immediately shifts. Instead of discussing what is reasonable, it becomes about proving your loyalty. Healthy relationships encourage choice. Toxic relationships manufacture obligation. Then there is emotional inconsistency. One day, they praise you. The next day, they criticize everything you do. One week, they make you feel important. The following week, they ignore your messages completely. This unpredictable behavior creates emotional dependency because your brain starts chasing the moments of approval. Psychologists often compare this to variable rewards. The uncertainty itself becomes addictive. Instead of asking whether the relationship is healthy, you become obsessed with recovering the version of the person who treated you well in the beginning. But that version may have existed only long enough to gain your trust. Another warning sign is constant victimhood. Pay attention to people whose stories always place them as the innocent victim while everyone else becomes the villain. According to them, every former friend betrayed them, every employer treated them unfairly, every relationship ended because the other person was toxic. Every conflict becomes someone else's fault. At first, this can inspire sympathy. Eventually, you begin noticing a disturbing pattern. The names change, the circumstances change, but the story never changes. If someone has endless conflict with nearly everyone around them, it becomes reasonable to ask whether they are the common denominator. Toxic people also have an unusual relationship with accountability. Healthy individuals may make mistakes, but they can acknowledge them. They apologize sincerely. They change their behavior over time. Toxic individuals often apologize only when it benefits them. Their apologies become tools rather than genuine expressions of responsibility. Listen carefully. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry you misunderstood. I'm sorry, but you made me do it. These are not apologies. They are attempts to shift responsibility while appearing reasonable. Equally dangerous is the habit of creating emotional dependency. Some toxic people subtly isolate you from others. They criticize your friends. They question your family's intentions. They suggest that no one understands you except them. Slowly, your world becomes smaller until they become your primary source of emotional support. Isolation increases dependence. Dependence increases control. This pattern has existed throughout history because it is incredibly effective. The smartest response is not paranoia. It is observation. Instead of judging people by their promises, judge them by their patterns. Anyone can behave well for a few days. Character is revealed through consistency. Watch how people react when they don't get what they want. Watch how they treat those who cannot benefit them. Watch how they speak about people who are no longer present. Watch whether their actions repeatedly match their words. Patterns rarely lie. Another important lesson is to stop confusing potential with reality. Many people stay in unhealthy relationships because they become attached to who someone could become instead of accepting who they repeatedly choose to be. Hope can be beautiful, but when hope ignores evidence, it becomes self-deception. Believe repeated behavior, not repeated promises. You cannot build a healthy future on someone else's endless excuses. Recognizing toxic behavior early is not about becoming suspicious of everyone. It is about becoming deeply aware of the difference between temporary mistakes and consistent manipulation. Every human being has flaws, moments of weakness, and bad days. Toxicity is not defined by occasional imperfection. It is defined by repeated patterns that leave you feeling smaller, more confused, more anxious, and less like yourself after every interaction. The moment you begin trusting patterns more than persuasive words, manipulation loses much of its power because awareness allows you to walk away from emotional traps long before they become emotional prisons. One of the greatest misconceptions in life is believing that being a good person means saying yes to everyone. From childhood, many people are taught that kindness means sacrifice, patience means silence, and love means endless tolerance. While these qualities can build meaningful relationships, they become dangerous when they exist without boundaries. A life without boundaries does not create peace, it creates permission. It silently teaches people how much of your time, energy, respect, and dignity they are allowed to take. Toxic people do not usually ask for all of your power at once. They take it one small compromise at a time. The first time they interrupt your plans, you forgive them. The second time they disrespect your opinion, you stay quiet. The third time they break a promise, you make excuses for them. Eventually, what began as isolated incidents becomes your new normal. Then one day, you wonder why you feel exhausted around certain people. The answer is simple. Every boundary you failed to protect became an invitation for someone else to push even further. People often believe respect is something others should naturally give them. In reality, Respect is heavily influenced by what you consistently allow. Human beings are constantly observing one another. They notice what behavior receives resistance and what behavior receives acceptance. If someone repeatedly crosses your limits without consequences, they unconsciously conclude that your boundaries are flexible. This is why boundaries are not created by words. They are created by actions. Anyone can say, "Please don't treat me that way." Very few people are willing to enforce those words with consistent behavior. The moment someone realizes that your no eventually becomes yes after enough pressure, your boundaries lose their authority. Consistency creates credibility. Imagine a castle surrounded by enormous walls. The walls exist for a reason. Not because everyone outside is dangerous, but because valuable things deserve protection. Your mind deserves protection. Your peace deserves protection. Your time deserves protection. Your future deserves protection. Yet many people leave the gates of their emotional castle permanently open because they fear appearing rude. They worry that setting limits will disappoint others. But ask yourself a difficult question. Why are you so comfortable disappointing yourself in order to avoid disappointing people who repeatedly disrespect you? That single question changes everything. Healthy individuals understand boundaries. They may not always like them, but they respect them. Toxic people often react very differently. The moment you begin saying no, they accuse you of changing. They call you selfish. They say you have become cold. They remind you of everything they have supposedly done for you. Why? Because boundaries remove the control they once enjoyed. When people benefit from your lack of boundaries, your growth feels like their loss. Do not mistake their discomfort for evidence that you are doing something wrong. Sometimes the strongest proof that your boundaries are healthy is the frustration they create in people who previously ignored them. One of the most empowering words you will ever learn is a simple two-letter word: no. Not an angry no, not a guilty no, not an apologetic no, a calm, confident, respectful no. Many people feel compelled to explain every decision. They believe saying no requires a lengthy defense. "I can't because I'm sorry, but I wish I could." Often, the more you explain, the more opportunities manipulative people find to negotiate your decision. Remember this: explanations invite debates, boundaries end them. A simple, respectful refusal is often more powerful than 10 minutes of justification. Another important lesson is understanding that access to your life should be earned, not assumed. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your thoughts. Not everyone deserves your trust immediately. Not everyone deserves your emotional availability. Trust should grow through consistency. Respect should grow through behavior. Access should grow through character. The strongest people understand that relationships develop in layers. They do not hand strangers the emotional keys to their lives simply because someone appears charming. Time reveals character. Pressure reveals intentions. Consistency reveals integrity. Boundaries also require accepting an uncomfortable reality. Some relationships will end when you begin respecting yourself. People who benefited from your silence may disappear. People who enjoyed controlling you may become distant. People who expected unlimited access may accuse you of becoming difficult. Do not chase them. Sometimes losing access to certain people is not a loss. It is evidence that your standards have risen. Many individuals fear conflict so deeply that they tolerate ongoing disrespect, but avoiding short-term conflict often creates long-term suffering. A 5-minute uncomfortable conversation today can prevent 5 years of emotional exhaustion tomorrow. Courage is not always loud. Sometimes courage is quietly saying, "This behavior is unacceptable." Sometimes courage is walking away without revenge. Sometimes courage is refusing to answer messages that only exist to provoke another argument. Silence can become a boundary. Distance can become a boundary. Limited access can become a boundary. Not every problem requires confrontation. Some problems disappear the moment you remove your availability. There is another truth many people discover too late. Boundaries are not designed to punish other people. They are designed to protect your future. Every hour spent managing unnecessary drama is an hour stolen from your goals. Every emotional argument drains energy that could have been invested in building your career, strengthening your health, or developing your purpose. Toxic people thrive when your attention remains focused on them. Successful people redirect that attention toward building their own lives. Notice the difference. One life revolves around reacting. The other revolves around creating. Eventually, people begin treating you according to the standards you consistently uphold. When you protect your time, people learn not to waste it. When you protect your peace, people learn not to disturb it. When you protect your dignity, people learn that disrespect carries consequences. The strongest boundary is not built with anger or intimidation. It is built with quiet certainty. You do not need to threaten anyone. You do not need to convince anyone. You simply decide what behavior belongs in your life and what behavior does not. Then allow your actions to communicate what your words no longer need to repeat. Because every boundary that is consistently enforced becomes a silent declaration that your self-respect is no longer open for negotiation. The final and most intelligent way to deal with toxic people is not to spend your life studying them. It is to spend your life becoming someone they can no longer influence. Too many people make toxic individuals the center of their emotional world. They wake up thinking about them, replay conversations with them, imagining revenge against them, or hoping they will finally change. Without realizing it, they remain emotionally attached to the very people they are trying to escape. That is the hidden victory of every toxic person. Even after they leave your life, they continue living inside your mind. Real freedom begins the day you stop organizing your life around people who drain your spirit and start organizing it around your purpose. Think about the strongest people you have ever met. Were they constantly proving themselves? Were they obsessed with winning every argument? Did they spend every day trying to expose toxic individuals? Usually not. They were too focused on building something meaningful. Purpose leaves very little room for unnecessary drama. A person with a clear mission naturally becomes less attractive to manipulation because their attention is invested elsewhere. They understand that time is their most valuable resource. Every hour spent arguing with someone determined to misunderstand them is an hour that could have been invested in learning, creating, improving, or growing. This shift in focus changes everything. Instead of asking, "How do I make this person respect me?" you begin asking, "How do I build a life that no longer depends on their respect?" That single question transforms your entire mindset. One of the greatest sources of emotional independence is self-respect. Notice the difference between confidence and self-respect. Confidence often comes from achievement. Self-respect comes from your standards. Achievements can rise and fall, money can disappear, careers can change, opinions can shift, but a person who refuses to betray their own values possesses a strength that circumstances cannot easily destroy. Toxic people search for emotional weaknesses. They look for people whose identity depends entirely on external validation. If your happiness depends on constant praise, criticism becomes a weapon. If your worth depends on being liked, rejection becomes terrifying. If your identity depends on one relationship, losing that relationship feels like losing yourself. The solution is not becoming emotionally cold. The solution is becoming emotionally complete. When you build a meaningful life, relationships become an addition, not the foundation of your identity. Your peace comes from your character. Your confidence comes from your discipline. Your satisfaction comes from your progress, not from another person's approval. Another powerful step is learning to become comfortable with solitude. Many people remain trapped in unhealthy relationships because they fear loneliness more than suffering. This fear keeps them accepting disrespect they would never advise someone else to tolerate. But solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. Loneliness is the pain of feeling disconnected. Solitude is the strength of enjoying your own company. A person who enjoys solitude becomes extremely difficult to manipulate because threats of abandonment lose their power. Toxic people often rely on one silent assumption. They assume you need them more than they need you. The moment that assumption disappears, so does much of their influence. Building inner strength also means developing emotional resilience. Life will always contain criticism. It will always contain misunderstandings. It will always contain people who dislike you for reasons that have nothing to do with reality. Trying to eliminate all criticism is impossible. Learning to survive criticism without losing yourself is wisdom. Every successful individual eventually discovers that approval from everyone is neither possible nor necessary. Your responsibility is not to satisfy every expectation. Your responsibility is to remain loyal to your principles. Another overlooked habit is surrounding yourself with healthy people. Human beings naturally become similar to those they spend the most time with. If your environment constantly rewards negativity, gossip, manipulation, and emotional chaos, those behaviors gradually become normal. But when you spend time with disciplined, emotionally mature individuals, something remarkable happens. Peace begins feeling normal. Respect becomes ordinary. Honesty becomes expected. Your standards quietly rise. You stop confusing emotional instability with passion. You stop confusing manipulation with love. You stop confusing attention with genuine connection. Healthy relationships teach you what you should have expected all along. They remind you that trust should feel safe. Communication should create clarity. Support should inspire growth. Love should never require abandoning your dignity. There is also tremendous power in forgiveness, but not in the way most people imagine. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as giving someone another opportunity to hurt you. It is not.